this is Unraged. Welcome back to my rants. Today we're going to be discussing another topic, and that is the planets, as you can probably tell by what's already next to me. So the planets are obviously giant balls in space. Yeah, that sounds good. Anyway, so they formed out of these, basically everything that didn't become the sun, and some of them are gas planets, which would be the big ones, and the small ones are terrestrial planets, and then there's also dwarf planets, which are a whole other mess that we are going to get into, but faster than you'd think. So, let's get right into it, shall we? Alright, first up we have Mercury, the closest planet to the Sun, and probably one of the least important ones when you're thinking about planets, but one of the more interesting ones, all the same. So, Mercury is the smallest of the planets. Sorry, Pluto, you're not a planet. You haven't been since 2006. And it's so small that two moons in the solar system, one of the moons of Jupiter named Ganymede and one of the moons of Saturn named Titan, are both larger than Mercury. So, yeah, keep in mind, a planet can be the same size as a moon, technically. And the only thing that defines moons is orbiting another planet. Anyway, so interesting things about Mercury are that in daytime on Mercury, it's extremely hot because it's extremely close to the sun, and at nighttime, it's extremely cold, which makes no sense because until you consider that Mercury has literally no atmosphere whatsoever. So the second that sunlight is gone, all the heat goes away. Alright. Now, and one other thing about Mercury is that it is mostly composed of iron, which is very unique for the planets in that, well, a lot of the planets have iron in them, at least the terrestrial ones, but Mercury is unique in that its iron is not just in its core, but in the entire planet. Next up we have Venus, which is hot. That's literally Venus's entire identity. Not really, but so let me put this into context. Again, I'm going to be using Fahrenheit. Sorry. Venus is 900 degrees Fahrenheit. I think that's somewhere around 400 Celsius, I don't know. So we haven't sent any satellites to Venus for 30 years. So that wasn't a very smart move on our part, because we ended up obsessing over Mars instead of Venus, even though Venus is closer, because as it turns out, Venus is so hot, and also the pressure on the surface of Venus is that of a mile under the ocean would be on Earth, so that also causes problems. Basically, anything we send into the atmosphere of Venus gets destroyed, and that's not fun for exploring the surface of the planet, so we stopped sending things there for a really long time, which was stupid. And so, we're finally launching. There's been basically another burst of announcements in like the past years, like 2 years, where a bunch of different space agencies announced that they're going to send things to Venus again, thank goodness. So that's happening now, but it hasn't happened for 30 years, and it's not going to happen for 4 more years until the Indian Space Research Organization, or ISRO for short, finally sends the first probe, and then the next probe won't be going up until 2038. If I remember correctly. So yeah. Don't get too excited. It might be 2028, I don't know. Anyway. Which is really a shame, because Venus actually is quite interesting. For example, its atmosphere is made out of carbon dioxide, hence why it's so hot. It's basically runaway global warming. Hint, hint, it's real, guys. Alright, that's Venus. Earth. What did you think it was gonna be? Mars? No, we're talking about our home planet. What else would we be talking about? It's the third planet. Yes, it is a planet for all of you flat earthers out there. So Earth is obviously the place we live, so you'd think you'd know everything about it, but you might not realize that there's a lot of interesting stuff on Earth that doesn't show up anywhere else in the solar system, like, I don't know, life, which, yeah, everyone knows subconsciously, but we don't really think about how crazy that is. I mean, come on. There are planets that are, like, I think Jupiter is 72 times the size of Earth, and it's just a giant ball of gas. So, yeah. The sun is a giant nuclear explosion, but Earth is also the only planet with an atmosphere that can contain water. And water is very important to us. The Earth also is the first planet to have a very well-known phenomenon known as moons. And moons are objects that orbit other planets. Yes, this is very well-known stuff. This is like kindergartner level stuff, but I don't care. I'm still explaining it because the Earth has tons of fascinating stuff like countries and continents and all that fun stuff that you already should know about. If you're anything like the average American, you probably don't know half of the information you probably should about the planet you live on. Like the fact that there are other countries. I mean, you know that, but you can't name any ones other than China, France, and Russia. And maybe the UK, which you think is the same thing as England, because England must be interchangeable. You also think that the Netherlands is called Holland, which it isn't. But I digress, because that's not what we're talking about. Although technically we are talking about Earth, so yeah, humans are on the planet Earth, along with dogs, cats, cows, bees, horses, llamas. Yes, I did say llamas. It was the only domesticated animal in South America before, in the Americas before colonization, so that's interesting. And a bunch of other animals that I'm not going to talk about because I could be here for centuries talking about how many animals there are, and I still wouldn't ever get close to finishing it because there's billions of them. And now we're on to Mars, the planet that every scientist seems to be woefully obsessed with, even though there's basically nothing there. And it's super boring, but for some reason, and that reason is because we can actually land there, even though we could do the same thing on the poles of Mercury, you stupid idiots. Mars, we've sent like 5 rovers and a drone to. Yes, a drone. And China has also sent a rover, so 6 rovers, I don't know. Mars has poles with ice. Some of it is water ice, some of it is other types of ice, and it's basically left over from the times when Mars had water, because Mars and Venus used to have water. Keyword used to. It's complicated. Basically, the sun grew and the habitable zone shrank. Plus, there was the whole thing with Venus being carbon dioxide and Mars having too weak of an atmosphere to sustain once the sun grew. Anyway, so Mars also has Olympus Mons, which is the tallest mountain in the solar system, absolutely dwarfs Mount Everest. And it also has the largest canyon in the solar system, which is so large that it's probably crosses about, I'd say, a third of the planet's length and can be easily spotted from space. So yeah, that's interesting. And Mars has 2 tiny moons named Phobos and Deimos. When I say tiny, I mean like, so you know the size of what would be a good example of this? So just imagine 15 square kilometers, or whatever it is. Imagine that turned into a moon. That's how big its larger moon is. Its smaller one is only like 7. And yes, I said kilometers because I don't know the number in miles. I'm sorry. Okay. Anyway, again, we need to stop sending things to Mars because we're sending things to Mars and not any of the other planets. We've only visited Neptune and Uranus collectively once, which makes no sense because, yeah. And when I say collectively, I mean we used the same probe for both planets. So yeah, I don't like how we keep sending stuff to Mars. It's not the best use of our time when there are 7 other planets and 5 dwarf planets. Oh yeah, and that gets us into our next topic. Ceres, first of the dwarf planets, and also the only one that's in the asteroid belt and not the Kuiper belt. What is a Kuiper belt, you ask? A Kuiper belt is everything after Neptune. Except for sometimes Pluto comes before Neptune, but it only caused 20 years. So it doesn't matter. Anyway, Ceres is the only dwarf planet that's in the asteroid belt, which is in between Mars and Jupiter, rather than in the Kuiper belt, which I just explained the location of. So the interesting things about Ceres, other than its existence, are the fact that it probably formed near the Kuiper belt, which is very confusing as to how it got to the asteroid belt, but we don't really have an explanation for that, or if we do, I don't know about it. So Ceres is also known for its glowing spots, which are actually just the sunlight reflecting off of salt deposits, of which it has a great many. Ceres is also suspected of having an underground ocean that has more water in it than the entire water supply of the planet Earth. And when I say water supply, I mean the oceans, the groundwater, the water that's in the crust, basically all the layers of, basically all the water on the entire planet. Ceres has way more. Anyway, so yeah, that's Ceres. It's really neat, and it's a dwarf planet. And it was also considered a planet for 50 years following its discovery, so sorry Pluto, but your demotion is nothing special. In fact, initially Ceres was demoted to being an asteroid, because it was discovered in the 1800s. So guess what? When it was demoted, the rank of dwarf planet didn't exist. And when Pluto got demoted, Ceres got promoted to being some of its former glory. And now, on to the next planet, Jupiter, first of the gas giants. Now, Jupiter is known for being the largest of the planets. It also has the most moons. I don't remember how many there are. I think it's somewhere in the 70s. It's also known for its red spot, which is a 300-year-old storm, and it doesn't show any signs of letting up, considering it's, again, 300 years old. And not getting any smaller, so yeah. Basically well, I wouldn't say a hurricane, because Jupiter is a giant ball of gas, so it's not water. And it's not a tornado because there's no ground, so yeah, just imagine a really intense storm, which also happens to be the size of the Earth, because yeah, it's about the size of the Earth. Anyway, so Jupiter is also, aside from its rings, or aside from its moon, now you know what I'm gonna say, Jupiter technically does have one tiny thin ring. You might be saying, oh, I thought only Saturn has rings. You're wrong. All the gas giants have rings. They just have different amounts, and Saturn's happen to be the most visible. And Jupiter also has had many probes sent to it, just not nearly as many as Mars, which for some reason is super popular. I'll never understand why. Maybe it's obvious to scientists, it's not to me. So yeah, Jupiter exists. Now we move on to Saturn, the planet that has rings. Except that, as I just told you, all the gas planets has rings. Sure, it's cool to look at in a telescope, but it's not the only one, so stop saying it's unique. Saturn does have something else that's unique, though. Saturn is the planet that, for some reason, on the top of it has a storm that is shaped like a hexagon. So that's neat. It doesn't make much sense to me. There is a reason for it. I don't remember the reason. But yeah, Saturn has a storm shaped like a hexagon on the top of it. Again, Saturn is a gas giant, so it's made of gas, so yeah, you're not going to the surface, assuming there is a surface, which we can't confirm or deny, because it's so pressured. It's hard to... Anyway, the pressure is so high, that's what I mean. Saturn also has lots of moons, just like Jupiter. So, it has the moon Titan, I think. Yeah, it does. It has the moon Titan, which is larger than Mercury, which I mentioned already. And it has a bunch of other smaller moons, including Shepherd moons, which keep its ring intact. And there are also Shepherd moons for the other planets, but they're not as well known. And when I say the other planets, I of course mean the gas giants, because again, the inner planets do not have rings, only the gas giants. For now. And Saturn has also had a bunch of different things sent to it. So yeah. Saturn. And now on to another planet, and obviously another planet. Well, not obviously, because we already went over a dwarf planet. Anyway. Uranus. Yes, I did say Uranus. It's not Uranus, it's Uranus. Get your potty jokes out of the way. Well, you can, because it's Uranus. Anyway, so Uranus is the first ice giant, because there is a subdivision of the gas giants called ice giants, and they look really similar to each other. Now, you might notice from this picture, Uranus has rings. Yes, I've mentioned this already, the gas giants have rings. But what's significant about this is Uranus actually has more rings than Saturn. So yeah, eat your heart out, Saturn, because Uranus has more rings than you, and it has all this time. So there's nothing special about you. Anyway, aside from not only having rings, Uranus also has something else that Saturn doesn't have. It turns on its side, and so do almost all of its moons, some of which don't, by the way, which is interesting. But not only that, there's more, because the ring also turns on the same side that the planet turns on, which means that instead of turning through space, it's more like it's rolling through space. Next up, we have the last planet. Sorry, Pluto. Neptune is Neptune. It's still got rings, but they're not as significant as Uranus's, so not much to talk about there. It has a fairly large moon, if I remember correctly. I believe it's called Triton, but I could easily be wrong on that. Anyway, it's also sometimes has a dark spot, which is a storm, but it typically doesn't last like Jupiter's does. Like, it will still last for a long time, but not 300 years long time. And, yeah, so Neptune also, the pressure in the core of Neptune is so heavy that it rains diamonds on the core of Neptune. Not that you'd ever be able to get there, but hypothetically, if you were somehow to be able to get to the core of Neptune, get back. By the way, you'd also have to survive raining diamonds, which are the hardest substance in the universe that we know of. you would have to, I don't know, go to Neptune, which is very, 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 very far away. You would have to get into the core without killing yourself, which is physically impossible. You'd also have to make sure that you don't freeze to death or burn to death. You'd have to make sure that you don't die in the diamond collection process. You have to somehow get out of the planet. And then you have to make it back to Earth. All of that just to harvest the immense diamond raining. And diamonds are basically worthless anyway now because you can actually produce them. You don't have to rely on them forming through geothermal processes anymore. Even though people will say, oh, but those are fake diamonds. No, they're physically the exact same thing. And diamonds aren't really worth anything anyway. I mean, they're worth something, but not nearly as much as they are worth in going and actually buying them. Anyway, this is supposed to be about Uranus, not diamonds, so... Uranus, last of the planets. Sometimes Pluto overtakes it in its orbit, though. So, interestingly, sometimes there are 2 dwarf planets before all planets end. Not usually, but every, 200 years or so, Pluto is inside for 20 years. Which means, I believe the last period like that was from 1982 to 1999. If I remember correctly, which I probably don't. So anyway, that's the end of all the planets. We have no more planets left, but luckily for you people who probably are getting sick of my voice by now, I hope not, we still have 4 more dwarf planets, so let's get into it. First off, we've got Pluto, the elephant in the room of all elephants in the room. Pluto is a dwarf planet. Get over it. It happened in 2006 because we discovered Eris, which we'll talk about lastly. Anyway, Pluto is the largest of the dwarf planets, if that gives you some tiny amount of solace. It also has 5 moons, most of which are insignificant, but Charon, the largest moon of Pluto's, is actually in a interesting orbit with Pluto, where really Charon and Pluto are orbiting each other, so really there's a debate on whether or not to consider Charon a dwarf planet as well, but we've been calling it Pluto's moon so long now, and all of the other moons of Pluto just orbit Pluto, that we're just going to keep calling it a moon realistically, because we don't like change. And we're weird like that. So, anyway, Charon is about 1/3 the size of Pluto. Pluto itself is mostly made of ice and all that fun stuff. So, yeah, Pluto is neat, and we finally sent a probe there. Our probe finally reached there in 2015. Same year we got pictures of Ceres, actually. We sent the probe of Ceres way after, but as it turns out, it takes 14 years to get to Pluto, and it only takes 4 to get to Ceres, so we got the pictures of Ceres 2 months first. So anyways, yeah, we have pictures of Pluto. After Pluto, we do not have pictures, we just have 3D models. Well, we technically have pictures, we just have really pixely pictures. For the pictures in the whiteboard that you'll see that's right there, I'm not gesturing, but I'm gesturing in real life. Not that you can see that, but whatever. Anyway, there will be displayed 3D models, which are technically only approximations of their appearances, because we don't know for sure what they look like, but we believe them to look something like this. Yep, that's right, there's more dwarf planets after Pluto. I mentioned that earlier. Howmia is the 3rd of the dwarf planets, and the one of many objects in the Kuiper Belt. It is unique to the dwarf planets that are known of, in that it is egg-shaped. And before you say this disqualifies it from being a dwarf planet, because you know nothing about the actual criteria of dwarf planets, and I'm not going to go through them right now because it would be a big pain and detour, and we already did that when we were talking about animals and diamonds. So Howmia is a egg-shaped, and the reason it's egg-shaped is because it spins so fast that the planet has been warped. And you might say, well, this is weird. It's actually not a phenomenon unique to Howmia. The Earth is like that too. It's just that the Earth is significantly less warped because it's spinning nowhere near as fast as Howmia is. A day on Howmia, if I'm remembering correctly, is only like 6 minutes. And I'm probably wrong on that because I haven't looked at the statistics for it in a long time. But that's how long I remember it being, so that's what we're gonna say here. Anyway, Howmia also is unique among the known dwarf planets in that it has a one singular ring, which means not only gas giants have rings. So not only is Saturn not special in the most rings, a dwarf planet also has rings. So Saturn's even less special. Hooray! Anyway, that's basically everything that's interesting about Howmia because we haven't gotten anything there and we're probably not going to for a couple decades. Maybe not until after we're all dead. So sleep nice tonight. Anyway, back on to the next one. And what is the next one, you may ask? Well, that's simple. It's the most unremarkable of all the dwarf planets. Yes, I'm being very negative here, but I really genuinely don't care. Makemake is its name. It's got some moons, and it's got basically nothing else of note to it. The only interesting thing about it is that it exists. And again, that it's got moons. And also, it is farther than Howmia, but less far than Eris, which is what we're about to talk about now. Eris is the last of the dwarf planets, and consequently the last thing we're going to talk about today, because I'm not going to start talking about every single asteroid in the solar system and all the comets. So, Eris is the reason Pluto became demoted. It was discovered, we thought it was bigger than Pluto because it was brighter than Pluto. It has a larger mass than Pluto, but it is physically smaller than it, if I remember. I might be getting those two things swapped around. Anyway, so, Eris is bright. It is a thing that we probably should have discovered far sooner than we did, and its discovery is what ultimately led to the creation of the label dwarf planet in 2006, and in 2008 the promotions of Howmia and Makemake, as well as the promotion of Ceres from asteroid to dwarf planet, and the demotion of Pluto from planet to dwarf planet. And that is all of the objects in the solar system that are of note, except for the sun, which is a giant atomic explosion, and I'm not going to get into that because that would start talking about nuclear physics, which I know nothing about. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and please watch some more if you want to. I don't know. As of the time I'm making this, the only other video is only 5 minutes long, so yeah. Next video is probably going to be shorter. The only reason this one is so long is because I decided to talk about let's see here, 13 different objects, and yeah, it took a while. So, yeah, end of the video. See ya.